And welcome and good morning. My name is Don Dudley. I'm the Director of Student Judicial Affairs at UC Davis. And the topic we're going to be talking about is sexual assault on campus, preventing, reporting, and responding. I'd first like to have my colleagues introduce themselves who are truly outstanding on this campus in terms of addressing this issue.
Good morning, I'm Wendy Delmendo. I'm the Title IX officer for the campus.
Hi, I'm Sarah. Woo, that was loud. I'm Sarah Meredith. I'm the Education and Outreach Coordinator for Campus Violence Prevention Program.
Good morning, I'm Jacqueline Lira. I'm the Victim Advocate for Campus Violence Prevention Program.
Hi, I'm Lisa Brodke. I direct the Harassment and Discrimination Assistance and Prevention Program, otherwise known as HDAP, formerly known as the Sexual Harassment Education Program.
Great. I don't know if everybody's cell phone is off. If not, I do like to hear the most interesting cell phone ringtones that people have. There should be a prize for that. In a very short span of time, really 45 minutes, we're going to be introducing what is an extremely complex topic on college campuses. It's one that lately is deservedly receiving national attention for how campuses deal with this. And sexual violence, I mean, certainly it has a lifelong impact on a victim. And campuses really need to do everything in their power to educate about it, prevent its occurrence, and then respond accordingly. Very much it's a collaborative approach. No one office or person can deal with it. And what we're going to do today is start off by talking about the policy and the legal framework that goes underneath or introduces this topic. And then secondly, we're going to talk about and demonstrate the practices that we're using here at UC Davis for dealing with sexual violence. So with that, I'm going to introduce and have Wendy talk a little bit about the policy and the legal framework.
So as Don said, this is really a matter that's getting national attention. So we thought it would be good to start with a legal and policy framework so we all have a common understanding in light of all the attention this is getting. You may know that the Federal Office of Civil Rights is up to 75 institutions of higher education now that are under investigation in the UC system. That includes UC Berkeley and UCLA, and we also just came off of a California state audit that focused on 4 institutions, including both UCLA and Berkeley. So it really is an important time for this issue. In terms of the existing federal law that covers it, there's really 3. There's Title IX, which I think up until recently, most people thought of most closely aligned with athletics, but it really covers sexual harassment and sexual assault as well. There's also the Clery Act that many of you may have some familiarity with, and then the recently re-released Violence Against Women Act. So starting with Title IX, it's really very straightforward, and you have the language there up on the screen. It's been in effect since 1972, and in essence, it just says that institutions of higher education won't discriminate against individuals based on their gender. We really had very little guidance on how Title IX applied in the sexual harassment or sexual assault arena until the Supreme Court weighed in on this, and here the case that's referenced deals with student-on-student harassment because that's most often what we see in the sexual assault arena. And so there, the guidance that we had from the Supreme Court was that universities are liable for student-on-student harassment if an official who has authority to deal with the issue actually knows about the alleged harassment and acted with deliberate indifference, meaning took no action to remedy the situation. And that line of cases comes to us primarily from athletics, where we had student athletes complaining about sexual assault, reporting to individuals in the athletics department who had some means of responding to it, but then essentially swept it under the rug and took no action. So really from that line of cases until 2001, we had very little guidance on this issue. There's a series of Dear Colleague letters that's referenced on the slide. These are letters that come out of the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights. They're not law, they're guidance, but when Office of Civil Rights comes to our campuses, this is what they're evaluating us under. So the first letter we have is in 2001, which told us that As institutions of higher education, we had an obligation to respond to allegations of sexual harassment if it occurred in relation to one of our programs and affected a student's experience in our educational program. Then we had 10 years of relative silence from the Office of Civil Rights, when in 2011, in an unveiling by Vice President Joe Biden, we had a Dear Colleague letter that told us that the responsibilities we have with respect to sexual harassment are the same with respect to sexual assault, and there was an expectation that institutions of higher education would respond vigorously to allegations of sexual assault, and this letter provided us with some additional guidance in terms of the kinds of remedies we were expected to offer students, the kinds of policies and procedures we had, and the kinds of prevention training that we should be offering to our students. And then just recently, there was a 52-page guidance that the department put out because there's still a need for clarification around these issues.
I will add very quickly that I think in materials that we present online, we can provide links
Sure,
to those documents for
absolutely.
those who would like to read them in detail.
So turning to the Clery Act, this is an act that every institution of higher education that distributes financial aid is required to follow. The Clery Act requires us to publish our crime statistics regarding certain kinds of crimes that occur in what's referred to as our Clery geography. So that's anything that happens on campus, particularly in student housing, and anything that happens in public property that surrounds the campus. The Clery Act also requires us to identify what Clery refers to as campus security authorities. Many of you in the room are probably campus security authorities. You probably get an email from the campus every year asking you to report crimes that you're familiar with. So anyone who has responsibility for student and campus activities is usually considered a campus security authority. And this idea of the campus geography also applies to any property owned or controlled by registered student organizations. So those of you who work with fraternities, sororities, other student organizations that would own or control property would also have to be reporting crimes that you know of that occurred or allegedly occurred in those properties. And then finally, we have the reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act. This became effective March 7th of this year. It does amend the Clery Act. It requires us to also report as crime statistics any allegations of domestic violence, dating violence, or stalking, and requires us as an institution to respond to those allegations in the same way we respond to sexual harassment and sexual assault. It also states in pretty specific terms the kinds of information we need to provide our students when they make complaints of sexual assault, dating violence, domestic violence, stalking. That has to be contained within the annual security report we publish each year, and then we also have to provide that to students who come forward. And then we're still expecting that there will be some further clarification of our responsibilities under this law when the regulations come out in November. Do you want me to-
Great. Well, I'll mention before maybe we move on to the next slide that when we talk about sexual assault in the title, we are talking more than just intercourse without consent. It is much broader in that sexual assault applies also to unwanted sexual touching, sexual harassment, domestic and dating violence, as well as stalking. So the framework we're working with and the practices we follow deal with all of those instances.
And if you're interested more in what those particular terms may mean, they're all contained within our local and system-wide policy, which you see referenced on the next slide here. When this information is sent out, we'll have links to that. But we also have this web resource, SA Help, so sexualassaulthelp.ucdavis.edu, where you can find those policies, and there's a wealth of information there for our students and our administrators on how the campus responds to sexual harassment and sexual violence. And then I think we're going to probably move now into talking about how we respond as a campus with a case management approach to these kinds of issues.
Exactly. So we have evolving practices on our campus and how to effectively deal with this issue. And I think what comes first, and probably is most important, is education and prevention. So I'm going to turn this over to Sarah and Jackie to tell us about some of the efforts we have on campus in that area.
All right, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the education and prevention work that we're doing on campus. And I'm sorry I didn't put these back there right when we first got here, but I did put some resources on the stage in the back if folks want to grab them. We can also send them out electronically. So when we talk about prevention and education on campus, I'm going to start with talking a little bit about the mandatory education for incoming students. So way back when, I think 2005, there was actually a California law that was passed, AB 1088, that provided some guidance, some mandates for CSUs, UCs, and California community colleges to provide all of their incoming students with certain information around sexual assault. In addition to that, the UC system received a grant from the Office on Violence Against Women that also required mandatory education for incoming students and added, in addition to sexual assault, information about dating violence, domestic violence, and stalking. So some of you may remember in 2010, we started the violence intervention prevention workshops that were, in 2010, done the first week of school. We messaged it as mandatory, and I think we got about 98% of the students that were incoming, undergraduate students that were incoming, that actually came to that program. In 2011, we incorporated that into summer orientation, and we also made it a hard mandate, meaning that if folks didn't complete the workshop, at some point in their first quarter at Davis, there was a registration hold that was placed until they came to one of the presentations. So we've been doing that since 2011. At each one of those sessions, the students get 2 resources. One is this little blue crisis resource card that has information on there about local law enforcement, Safe Ride, support for students, so it's got the Women's Center and the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, and asexual resource on the front. Information about Lisa's program, HDAP, and then on the back there's information about accessing sexual assault and relationship violence services, counseling services, and student health services. So that's all on this little card that they get. This year, because we have the website, the SA Help website, that website was also added to this card. So all of the incoming undergraduate students get this when they come here. In addition to that, and I'm sad to see that Meryl's program is not going today, but so I think it's 2010 or 2011, Health Education and Promotion had a group of students that participated in the Davis Honors Challenge that created this booklet, How to Be Successful, which is a bunch of information about healthy sexual communication and some other safer sex practices, as well as some resources in the back. So I partnered with them. They give me the booklets, and then I make sure that they go out to all of the incoming students with the message of, if we had more healthy sexual communication, we may be able to lower the instances of sexual assault and sexual violence. So that's why they get that booklet. And there are some copies of that in the back. So we are continuing to do mandatory education for incoming students. This year we are moving to an online model, so it'll be a little bit different. Jackie and I did have an opportunity to go into the summer orientation just to say hello to the students and let them know that we have this program. We've had this program on campus since 1979. We went into parent orientations and answered some questions for the parents, and then just reminded the students that they would be getting a link to complete the online module and to make sure to check their their UC Davis emails. In addition to the mandatory education for incoming students, we do ongoing education, and we're not the only program on campus that does ongoing education. And I think that that's a really important distinction to make here, is that there's 30,000 students on this campus, that no one program can do all of it, that it's important that we all work together and collaborate together, but that there are different, it's the same message around no tolerance for sexual violence and healthy communication and healthy relationships, but it may be coming to the students in a variety of different forms from different people. So housing may have passive programming with the bulletin boards, and HDAP may be going in and talking with student athletes, and the Women's Center holds an annual conference every year. CVPP will go in and do programming in the dorms, so we have a program called Healthy Relationships Bingo, and we'll go in and talk about healthy relationships. There's also the ever so popular Porn and Popcorn, which is really about sexualized violence in the media, but nobody will come to that program if you call it sexualized violence in the media. So, we make it student friendly, We don't actually watch any porn and that. And then in addition to that, we will work with student groups and collaborate with them if their student group has any interest in doing a program that's specific to their group. So fraternities and sororities will often approach usually myself or Jackie to talk about, you know, we want to do a program for our group, and these are the needs of the group, and so let's create something together. There's also the Greeks Against Sexual Assault class, which hasn't been taught in about a year, just because I've been working on developing the content for the online program for VIP. But it is still in existence, and that class is a united class. It's a 4-unit class, pass, no pass, that's open to any Greek life member, where we do a quarter-long class covering sexual assault, relationship violence, stalking, being a resource, reporting options, bystander intervention, so on and so forth. So that's kind of a quick snapshot of what our prevention education efforts look like on this campus. Am I forgetting anything?
No, that's great, Sarah.
Okay.
Oh, please do.
One really new resource that you may not yet be aware of, because we haven't sent out a lot of publicity about it yet, is that our office just finished developing an online course on sexual harassment prevention for student employees. As you know, that's a moving target of a group to try and reach. You can't get them all in one place at one time. They change every quarter or every week or whatever. And so we finally got it together to create this course. So we will send out some information to all of you, probably, at least I hope it reaches all of you. But know that that's out there. It's on currently the learning management system through staff development. Student employees can access that. So we'll get you the details, but know that that exists.
Great, thank you, Lisa. In addition, what we can provide more information about later or afterwards are what is expected, or what are the key definitions that we're dealing with involving sexual assault, that being consent, what constitutes consent, what constitutes incapacitation. So what I'd like to do next is, I think you're probably wondering, what's my role in this? You know, what do I have to do if something happens? And I'm going to turn this over to Lisa to walk us through a couple of scenarios and to help answer that question.
Okay, actually,
Oh, easy.
okay. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Okay, so as Don said, you're probably thinking, okay, this is all great policy and law and important information to know about, and what do I do in a situation? So let's think about that. So what if a student comes in to talk to you one day and immediately starts sobbing? And when you ask what's wrong, the student tells you that they're failing 2 classes and they're freaking out about that. You know the student has always done very well academically. And when you ask what's going on, the student shares that they were sexually assaulted at a party a month earlier, and they haven't been able to concentrate ever since then. So I know we want to talk about what would you say, what would you do, but I think it's really also important to think about what are the issues that come up for you when you hear this, with that student sitting in your office in tears. So normally we would do this in really small groups, and we'd have this really robust conversation, et cetera, but we're moving along really fast here. So you can just shout out, what comes up for you when you just think about trying this on for size? I find it hard to believe that nothing comes up for you. Yes. Okay, great, so medical issues. What else? You'd call me, okay. What else comes up for you? Anger. I don't like that my student has been hurt and is in this position. Okay, what else?
Privacy.
Privacy, can you say more about that?
Okay. What's the student's level of desire for privacy and our inability as many in our course to
Great, excellent point, and probably also related to that is maybe some question about, well, how much information should I be even asking for here? What am I supposed to gather here, right? Maybe concerns about, was the perpetrator one of our students as well? And do I know that student? And what does that trigger for me, et cetera? Okay, so now, what would you say? And what would you do? I heard one suggestion, call our office. Always a good idea. Always a good idea. What else? I think somebody's coming with a microphone for you, if you don't mind, just because we're being recorded here.
So
Thanks.
I had a situation exactly like this. I had a student who was in academic difficulty, admitted to me, I was the first person she had told about this. I immediately reassured her about the academics. We're going to put that aside. We're not going to discuss that. I called, I believe, CAPS, and I was referred to the Crisis Center at Student Health and Wellness. I called up them, spoke to a triage nurse, referred the student there. I was somewhat concerned about the student actually making that trip over by themselves. I was not in a position to be able to do that myself and take them over, but I did sort of talk to them, reassure them, and say, will you go, please? Are you going to go? And so having that triage was, I think, really helpful.
That's great, that's great. And as Don has said and other people have commented, we all work really well together. We all play nicely. This is not the case on every campus, I can assure you. And so we're lucky here that we all do like each other, we respect each other, and we work really well together. So yeah, I think reaching out to any of us at that point and knowing what the resources are that you can refer the student to, CVPP, right, sitting right here, SJA, us, the health center, counseling services, and I want to ask if maybe Sarah or Jackie, can you talk people through sort of the issues with like connecting with the triage nurse, et cetera? Or,
So most of you are familiar with the fact that counseling services used to be CAPS, now it's Student Health Counseling, is doing all of their drop-ins through their urgent care, and so they're having folks go in and see an advice nurse first to be triaged into seeing a counselor. One of the issues that has come up and that we are still toying with to figure out is that the advice nurse is a mandated reporter for any if they see any injuries or suspect that there are injuries related to a crime, they have to report that to law enforcement. That's a healthcare mandate. So we're trying to figure out how to make sure that folks, especially in a situation where there's domestic violence, where they may present with injuries, that they are still able to access confidential services without being put in a situation where they're talking to an advice nurse, not realizing that the advice nurse now has a mandate to report to law enforcement. So that's about it.
well, so I think the language that might be helpful for you to know about, 'cause like your example, if you're going to walk someone over, if you're going to make a call for them, is to ask to speak to, is to let counseling services know or let the student health center know, I have someone who needs to speak with the psychologist today for personal reasons. Okay, that's like magic language, so that it just bypasses the whole triage nurse, the whole medical thing, and gets somebody right into mental health care. Yeah, you had a question.
I'm right.
Sorry.
You're fine. So our office is set up, sorry. Can you hear me? Because this thing's kind of echoing.
I think it's for the recording they want you to use.
So our office is set up kind of like your panel right there where it's open.
Sorry, can you say what office, do you mind saying?
The OUR, the Office of the Registrar.
Thank you.
In Marac Hall. And what I've had in situations like this where I have to call the police because I can't take them in the back room. I can't take the time, not that I don't want to, but to hit 5 different phone numbers and somebody be out that day or out sick, or out to lunch. And
Right.
so is there a streamlined way that you feel that should be better than calling the police in this situation? Because I don't want the student to walk away and not go to CAPS, because I feel responsible for that student after they've shared this horrific situation. And it doesn't always have to be that.
Right.
Sometimes it's that other stuff where, they're withdrawing from school because they don't know that there's another resource.
Yeah. Does one of you want to address that?
So I think a really good way to respond to that would be to still call the dispatch for the police department and have the advocate paged. Because either Sarah and I, we're available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and they will immediately call our cell phones and we can immediately respond within about 10 minutes at the very least by phone to you and get some insight into what is the situation, what is needed, and then come immediately to you so the student doesn't have to traipse across campus. We are no strangers to walking to wherever we need to go in order to make it a little bit easier for the victim in that situation. Is that? Yep. give your name, your callback number, say, could you please have the advocate call me back? They will call us and we immediately will call you back.
And the reason we're emphasizing calling the advocates is that we really want the students to remain in control of what happens
Right.
with their complaints, their particular situation. It's not that we don't want to involve police, but we want that to be the students' decision. And Jackie and Sarah are experts at talking through the students in a confidential way through what their options are.
Did you want to add anything, or you're? No. Okay. Okay, so I want to move on to another scenario, but I also just want to make the point that if any of you were thinking about the issue about confidentiality, that you could talk in confidence with the student and it would never go any further, please let go of that idea. You cannot guarantee confidentiality to folks in these situations. It's not like we're going to blab this and broadcast it, but really you do have to call us to let us know whether you've taken a first step by connecting the student with CVPP. You need to call my office to let us know that you've made that referral so that we can all be on the same page, that we're responding appropriately. Yeah, Milt.
Yeah, I just want to go back to the question and the response. I think your response was so appropriate, but I think that a lot of people don't know that. Because I think, so my suggestion is that we may want to spend some time thinking about how we address that and how do we provide the kind of communication that are going to allow people to know that that's an appropriate protocol. Because I think a lot of folks within student affairs and probably at this institution don't know about that.
Yeah.
Part of the reason we're here, and we're so happy to be able to do this presentation.
I just wanted to respond to the triage response and just say that although we're not advertising this, I think in this situation, you could also just refer the student to North Hall, and we will triage them by a mental health professional. So it will be confidential, and they can bypass the possibility of being seen by an advice nurse.
Great, thank you. Let's move on to another scenario because there may be, oops, sorry. Oh, you got it, okay. So what if a student employee comes into work and you notice scratches on his face and a bruise over one eye? When you ask what happened, he mumbles, "It's personal." You overhear other students talking about how this student's partner beat him up at home over the weekend. So again, check in. What issues come up for you? Safety of the student, okay. What else? So I know you're all student affairs professionals and you're really, really skilled at what you do, but if one of your responses is, "Oh my God, I really don't ever want to have to deal with this situation," that is really okay. These are horrible situations, all of these scenarios. They're terrible. They're really painful. They trigger a lot of stuff for us as professionals, I think. And I think it's important to just to recognize that in yourself. Then we move on and we do deal with it, but I think you do have to kind of cut yourself some slack and realize, wow, this is hard. These are really tricky situations. This is scary stuff. So, okay, so what would you do in this situation? First of all, what are we dealing with here? What form of sexual violence are we dealing with here, potentially? Domestic violence, maybe dating violence, depending on whether they're living together in a non-cohabitating relationship, maybe. But okay, some kind of intimate partner violence, possibly. Possibly, and you only know that because maybe it's what you've heard the other students talking about. So we got lots of confidentiality issues, right? Lots of safety issues, lots of how do we get this student some services, but they don't even want to talk to you about it. It's personal. So what do you do? Melody.
I would probably approach the student employee in my office privately and say that I'm concerned and that if they ever feel like they need to talk to someone about anything, that I would be available to them and that they have a safe environment that they could speak to someone in confidence without sharing that with anyone else. I would just let them know that there was someone available who had noticed something.
So I totally get and appreciate wanting to create that environment for folks, but really, can we promise somebody they can come talk to us in confidence, that nothing that they say is going to go further? Maybe not, depending on what they share, right? So it's tricky, because I know we all want to do that. We want to keep our students safe. We don't want them to lose control of their situation. That's why what Wendy said is so important. We want to try and get folks into the place where they still maintain the most control over their situation. And usually, in sexual violence cases, that's probably going to be CVPP right off the bat, because Jackie and Sarah can talk with the students about what their options are for reporting, either to law enforcement or to the university. And some people do one, some people do the other, some people do both, some people do neither. They really just want to talk with somebody in CVPP, figure out how to get medical attention, how to get connected with other resources, maybe think about changing the relationship, or at least getting to a safe place, if in fact that's what's going on here. So it's really, I know, hard to think about not having that heart-to-heart conversation with somebody, but maybe the best thing that you can do for that student is to make sure they know about CVPP, and then again, call us so that we can consult, because every case is a little bit different, so that we can consult about what else we might want to communicate with that student employee, and what else we might want to communicate back to the students who are talking about it, right? We may need to get them some information as well. Here comes a microphone, sorry.
I'm in the Student Academic Success Center, and we're going to be all going through CANRA training for that. So I think that makes us mandatory reporters, right?
For CANRA, right?
For CANRA, okay.
For-
So my question is, at what point are we responsible? In these situations, it seems like we call CVPP, and they make the report, do we do it as well at some point? What?
No, kind of as Wendy was saying. So with CANRA, and I don't know if Wendy, do you want to address this?
Yeah, so CANRA is much different than the sexual harassment and sexual assault policy. For those of you who aren't familiar with CANRA, it's the California Child Abuse, Neglect, and Reporting Act. So it applies to what you might know about physical or emotional abuse experienced by someone who is a minor, okay? So that's very different than, say, a junior here at the university who, we expect to be over 18 reporting sexual assault. We still want to know about it, but it's a different kind of mandate.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, let's do one more scenario. Oh, sorry, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry, I want to add on to just in terms of where students may be accessing support and be really clear that we work really closely with counseling services. We're not therapists, we do crisis intervention, and our area of expertise is really around helping people understand what their rights and their options are and walking them through that process and advocating for them. So I'll often refer to us as like the action folks. There are sometimes students who really just want support services who aren't interested at this time in even really discussing what their options are for reporting or anything else for that matter. They may really just want to go to another confidential service, which might be CAPS. So I would, always put out there that you can contact us to consult to figure out where may be the best place to get that student to. We're happy to talk with them about where their other resources are at. But I want to make sure that it's clear that we have a lot of support services on this campus, including CAPS. And then just to add on to the CANRA piece, if a student discloses, if they're over the 18 and they disclose that they were sexually abused as a minor, that is not a mandated reporting situation for you. It's only if they're a minor currently while the abuse is happening.
Great. Okay, so one more scenario, just really quickly, because we have some other, we want to make sure there's ample opportunity for questions too. So, one of your colleagues tells you that a certain student has been hanging around the office a lot lately, always finding excuses to talk to them. I'm sure you never have students like that. The colleague is pretty sure that they saw the student watching them while they were working out at the Arc recently. Your colleague is really uncomfortable and asks what you think they should do. So, what kind of issue are we dealing with here, or issues? Okay, it's a trick question. So is this stalking? Okay, so here's the definition of stalking from our policy. Behavior in which a person repeatedly engages in conduct directed at a specific person that places that person in reasonable fear of his or her safety or the safety of others. Now, your colleague is really uncomfortable, right? one of the problems with getting into kind of this realm of sexual violence is that when you start thinking about it, you may start seeing, like with sexual harassment, just plain garden variety sexual harassment, you may start seeing it in lots of places where it may or may not actually be happening. So yeah, maybe there's some stalking going on here, but on the face of it, it might be that we've got a student who's looking for some attention, a colleague who's uncomfortable, but maybe not for unlawful reasons, right? So it's, again, one of those situations where each case is a little different, and it might really help to talk it through with somebody. What kinds of resources could you suggest to your colleague? ASAP, possibly, right? Could the colleague call us or call CVPP or call SJA? Absolutely, right? If there's a student that needs some attention, perhaps SJA really ought to be involved. If it's potentially stalking, probably we ought to be involved. So just wanted to throw it in there to get you thinking about these issues too. So I'm going to stop there, and we'll have time for questions.
Great, thank you, Lisa. In fact, that's probably the most important part of this, is introducing the education piece and the what-if piece in terms of what you need to do if you encounter a situation. So what we want to move on to quickly is to talk about what are the practices we have in place now here at UC Davis. And I think it's probably helpful to make a distinction between responsible employees and confidential resources, and then what happens, what places the university on notice when they have to do something. So I don't know if you could maybe address that briefly, Wendy, or any of you.
So we've talked quite a bit already about confidentiality and how there are designated confidential resources on campus, CVPP, ASAP, CAPS. For the most part, the rest of the campus is not a confidential resource. So Lisa and I and Dawn, we're not confidential resources. You and your offices, unless you're from one of those designated offices, are not confidential resources. So we urge you to contact us when you receive these complaints, so we can help you respond to the student, and so we can make sure the student is receiving the resources that they need and that they're entitled to. Lisa, did you want to add anything to that?
I think the important part is if a student comes to you and identifies the situation and you refer them, which you should, to CVPP, while the student may talk confidentially with CVPP, it doesn't mean it's confidential in terms of the university's purposes. We are on notice and we need to respond to the situation. It's an important distinction.
Yeah, so that's why I was saying please do call us so that we really can all make sure that we're working together to get the right services for the student and to make sure we're fulfilling our institutional obligations as well. You should also know that in terms of sexual harassment and sexual violence issues, within Student Affairs, also the Women's Center and the LGBTQIA Resource Center are also designated confidential resources. Okay.
Great. And for students of concern, SJA is mentioned as a place, and many of you may have had conversations with our case manager, Jennifer Chow, or any of the individuals in our office also help to deal with these situations, and again, we work closely together. Finally, Lisa mentioned about how difficult these situations are for you as a staff person, so also keep in mind taking care of yourself, using a resource like Academic and Staff Assistance Program, and that can be very, very helpful. So briefly to talk about our practice, how we move forward is, again, we work together. Generally, if a student comes forward and says that they've been a victim of a sexual assault or any of the categories we mentioned, then the initial intake in terms of reporting comes through HSTAP and Lisa, in which generally the victim's advocate accompanies them and explains to them the process, lets them know about the resources and what will take place. In addition, although the matter, again, is still an allegation, it hasn't been adjudicated, the university has a responsibility to provide interim measures to make sure that the student feels safe on campus. So perhaps Jackie or Sarah can talk a little bit about, just briefly, what are some of the interim measures that are available?
So it really depends on the student's needs, the situation, how much involvement they want through CVPP as they sort of determine which course of action is going to fit best for them. But some of the interim measures could be including helping them attain a no contact order through Student Judicial Affairs in the event that their perpetrator or accused student is also affiliated with the university as a student here. We can also assist in obtaining restraining orders through the court system in Yolo County if necessary. We work very closely with housing as well. So if there's a situation in which their living arrangements, they don't feel safe there, the assault occurred there, their perpetrator lives near them or knows where they live, we work very closely with housing, both on campus and with some of the property management companies at West Village in tandem to make arrangements to move the victim if we need to, get them in a safe space. We will help sort of outline the processes for them in terms of reporting to law enforcement, reporting to the university what that looks like and what that entails, and then allow for the student to make the decision that is best for them, and then we simply make that course of action as easily as we possibly can.
Great. And to make it clear, it's the victim, the complainant sometimes referred to, who we want to have in control of that process. So we don't report to the police. It's the decision of the victim. And now we are talking about, it's the university's response. This is separate from the criminal justice system, but it's an equal obligation that universities have. So probably what we need to do is if it's another student, there are two things that then take place. There needs to be fact-finding to determine whether the allegations are substantiated, and then there's the SJA conduct process. So on this outline here, I guess I can only, here we go. Talk briefly about Title IX investigation, which takes place through Wendy's office, and then the SJA process, which takes place through Student Judicial Affairs.
So after a student has met with Jackie or Sarah and made a decision to inform the university of a complaint, what would typically happen, assuming that the accused is also an affiliate of the university and we have enough information to move forward, is that we would assign it for an investigation. And there are two investigators in my office who review these complaints. They meet with the complainant, they meet with the accused, they meet with any other witnesses who may have observed something. They review relevant documents, including emails, text messages, and then they prepare a report and make a determination as to whether or not the allegation can be substantiated. The standard that we use is preponderance of the evidence, meaning we're looking at whether it's more likely than not that the incident occurred. We are not subject to a criminal standard of evidence, so we're not looking at something beyond a reasonable doubt like the justice system would. And by policy, we have 60 working days to complete that review. We are trying to get these done as quickly as possible, so oftentimes we're getting them done quicker than that. At the conclusion of the investigation, if the determination is that the allegation is substantiated, meaning that the evidence supports the student complainant's allegation, then we forward that to Student Judicial Affairs so that the conduct process can be engaged.
Great, thank you. So upon receipt of the report, if substantiated, then the conduct process, I know many of you are familiar with SJA as dealing with academic honesty and cheating, but we also have the same role with respect to social misconduct, including sexual assault. So one thing that's been made very clear by the Office for Civil Rights is that both the complainant and the respondent in the process have to have equal rights in terms of an equal right to pose questions about what occurred, an equal right to appeal any decision, an equal right to have an advisor accompany them through the disciplinary process. And although in most cases a complainant doesn't have the right to find out the results of the disciplinary process regarding the respondent with respect to sexual assault, they have a right to be informed of what the final outcome is in any disciplinary action. So in terms of Student Judicial Affairs, we always offer two ways in which we can hopefully resolve a referral. One, our first way is through what we call an informal resolution process. A Student Judicial Affairs officer meets one-on-one with the student. We provide them with the information. They can obtain a copy of the investigation report. And if substantiated, typically we will make a proposal based on the incident, what disciplinary action we would find adequate and judicious for that violation. What we also do in this case is meet with the victim and get feedback from them and some input from them. We're not placing the burden on them to make a decision, but we feel it's important to receive consideration for them in terms of possible consequences. And I will say, throughout this entire process, CVPP's work is not done. They continue to support and help that victim all through that process. So if we propose a disciplinary sanction and a student accepts responsibility, then we can resolve the matter. If we cannot, then the university can proceed to a more formal hearing process in which the university bears the burden of proof to establish that sexual assault happened. And again, we have a preponderance of the evidence as our standard. Now, for some, that may seem odd. Why are we going through two investigation processes in terms of looking into the matter? And the reality is the investigation by Title IX is required, but it is not dispositive on deciding whether disciplinary action can be levied against the student. In the disciplinary process, a student has some additional rights, for example, questioning any parties that would testify at the hearing, and therefore to determine disciplinary actions, then we still need to go through the SJA conduct process. If a student is in violation, the next question is, what are the appropriate disciplinary actions? Well, as we know, sexual assault is an extremely serious form of misconduct on college campuses. So typically we are looking at either suspension or dismissal from the university. At the very least, we want to make sure that the victim feels that they can complete their education here safely without having to worry about the situation or the respondent, the person responsible. But we also have to take actions not only to protect and ensure the safety of the victim, but we also have to protect and address the campus and the community concerns so that the community remains safe. And I'm not sure if you want to say anything about that quickly, Wendy, or if that's kind of appropriate there.
Yeah, I think.
Okay. Some of that can be education, other things that we need to do. So with the disciplinary sanctions, whether it's by agreement or through a formal hearing process, we notify the complainant about the outcome. If the decision is finding not in violation, the complainant has a right to appeal as well. So that's the conduct process as far as how we address this matter. And again, we all work closely together. And I guess let's move on quickly to what's on the horizon.
So I think it's safe to say that there's going to be national attention on this topic to come over the next year and probably longer. Just in the last couple of weeks, I think at least 3 federal bills were initiated. We have state legislation that's also focused on this topic. So I hope, perhaps next year we'll be back here to update you on what the current state of affairs is. You may also be aware that there's a White House task force that is focused on this effort, and they are preparing a number of materials for institutions of higher education to rely on. They announced last week a new initiative to come in the fall called It's on Us, and so we're waiting to see marketing materials related to that. But you'll probably see events focused on this in the fall. And then finally, you may be aware that President Napolitano convened a task force in July on this subject. The task force report is in the works now. It's phase 1 that will be released to the regents in September, and then the work of the task force will continue probably through the next academic year.
And I will add that Milt is absolutely correct. The most important thing is to be able to educate and make people aware on the campus about how the university addresses this issue, the resources that are available, and what you need to do in these situations. And I know all of you are willing to do presentations and to talk with groups so that we can educate everybody on this campus. Great. We have no time for questions. But we will be available afterwards, I think, for some time to be able to answer questions. We'll get these materials online and also provide our email addresses, and we'll be more than happy to talk with you. So again, I'd like to thank my colleagues a great deal, and thank you very much for joining us.